Paterson is a 2016 movie from veteran American director Jim Jarmusch. It stars the American actor Adam Driver as a bus driver. Is that a coincidence? Heck no, that's a pun, a joke within the movie. What is this movie about? It's so interesting to watch this movie, and I think it's the mode of the movie that gets me in the mood of maybe poetry making, maybe art creation, maybe just noticing details and observations. There's a lot of poetry in this movie because the main character, Paterson, is a poet. Now, he's an ordinary worker who goes to work every day driving a bus around Paterson, New Jersey. We see his routine. The movie is structured, has a 7-day, even 8-day structure to it. And Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, his work week, and then the weekend. He's got a routine, but during his off hours, during his free time, he's writing poetry, which we see scribbled on the screen, read by Adam Driver. And then maybe you're supposed to compare it or think about how it kind of connects to the ordinary life that we're seeing. Paterson's a really sweet guy, in my opinion. He has a lot of viewpoints, a lot of things he could say, maybe a lot of desires, maybe a lot of rage. He's really a gentleman all the way through. He has a lovely wife, played by Golshifteh Farahani. Her name's Laura, and there's a brief moment in the movie where it likens Laura to Petrarch, the great Italian poet. Just like Paterson has his Laura, so Petrarch had his Laura. She's a very sweet lady too, and this is a wonderful movie relationship that I frankly find pretty inspiring. Maybe they're newlyweds, it's hard to tell. We don't get a timeline for them. He seems to put up with her, and especially with her dog, who's cute, an English bulldog, but it doesn't like Paterson very much. And he's putting up with her style choices in the house. She's a homemaker, interior designer. Interesting movie in that there's a lot of touches of like 50s, 60s America here. There's no hint that she wants to go out into the world and work in the world, but she enjoys being in the home and making cupcakes. But when I asked what this movie is about, how could I possibly describe the plot? You could say it's plotless. Basically nothing happens except for the routine that Paterson goes through and the poetry he creates. There is one thing that happens late in the movie in a typical kind of 3-act structure, but what's fascinating to me about this film is it totally plays with all viewer expectations, certainly mine. As I'm watching this movie, I'm waiting for something interesting or challenging or more movie-like to happen. I mean, for example, you watch this couple on screen and you ask, when are they going to have a fight? When are they going to have a breakdown? When is he going to hit on some other girl and have an affair? Another question, is she going crazy in the home, being a homemaker? Is she going to start to dominate him and lord it over him, and is he going to get annoyed with that? Also, is the dog going to get stolen? There's a moment where Paterson is told by street guys, hey, your dog's valuable. You try not to get it dog jacked. So I'm always waiting around for something movie-like to happen, something really, really exciting. But what this movie does is it keeps that from happening. For the most part, really, this movie is in the mode of poetry and poetry making, artistic creation, having us dwelling on the words and the details of the movie, and whatever significance we could find in them. It's a much slower paced movie than most movies. Heck, I would say even for slow movies, this is pretty slow. And yet I think that's a mode that's deliberate on Jarmusch's part, trying to knock us out of our ordinary busy lives in the smartphone era and get us into the mood of poetry. I mentioned smartphones at least 4 times in this movie. It's brought up that the main character, Paterson, does not have one. We do see a couple snippets of smartphones in the odd corners of the screen. What's weird, again, this is like a 60s, 80s movie or era or time in Paterson, New Jersey. It's sort of, I think, Jarmusch's quasi-ideal of a society in a way, is that there are no smartphones in this movie besides a couple snippets of them. Even the people on the bus don't have smartphones, and Paterson definitely doesn't have one. He needs one at one point in the movie when the bus breaks down and he needs to call somebody, and he's distraught over that, but he actually says that smartphones would create a leash for him, not unlike his dog with the leash around its neck. So maybe this movie is contrasting typical smartphone use, people are too busy, enamored with them, to notice the individual details of life, which is what the poet Paterson needs to fuel his artistic creation and his drive. What's funny or ironic, there are no screens in this movie either, and yet this movie is watched on a screen. There's a moment where the bar that Paterson regularly goes to every night, the barkeeper says, I'm not going to have a TV in my bar. And how many American bars in real life don't have TVs? Probably next to none. This guy's not going to keep a TV in his bar. You don't see any TVs in Paterson's house. There are no screens basically anywhere. But, that's the irony. This movie has to be seen on a screen. And I feel like, again, it's trying to knock you into the mode of what is poetry, how to absorb it, entertain it, love it, and maybe even create it for yourself. The movie's setting is really potent for a lot of reasons. It's Paterson, New Jersey. The American poet of the mid-20th century, William Carlos Williams, wrote an epic poem about Paterson called Paterson. The main character is called Paterson, of course. The bar, again, that Paterson frequents has celebrities or well-known people on the wall. And, poetry between William Carlos Williams and Allen Ginsberg growing up there. There's a poetic heritage or history there that Paterson, unbeknownst to anybody in the world, is continuing. He's an ordinary guy writing probably great poetry. I think his poetry is well done, but also accessible to viewers. And you get this sense that ordinary people, mainstream Americans, anybody who you look at and think of them in terms of their vocation. He's a bus driver, he's a mechanic, etc., etc. But you don't see the inner person and what they're also capable of. For Paterson, it's making great poetry. Now, that's like the story of William Carlos Williams, the real man who was a medical doctor, or various other, early Wallace Stevens, early 20th century American poets. Probably a lot of poets today even who are working class even, and yet making poetry, which is not going to get anybody a living or celebrity anymore. And yet it is a passion and pursuit that is universal to humanity and throughout our entire history. The use of poetry, the love of poetry, language as an artistic medium in and of itself. Weird that the movie has a lot of twins in it. You actually hear that at the very beginning of the movie. The opening sequences that Paterson's wife says she dreamt of them having twins. You see on the screen Paterson and her kind of there, but they're also divided. Are they twins or opposites? That's interesting because there's a racial and cultural dynamic here, both in the marriage in terms of Paterson and his Persian wife, and then at the bar, black and white people intermingling. I think this is a racially integrated society through and through, and you get black and white all over this movie, not just in the shapes and the color scheme that Laura makes in the house, but also in terms of the people and their skin color. So those are things that are unalike, but then you have the twins in that a part of her dream. They're twins, and I'm not sure why there are so many twins, except to think or to suggest that for poetry, to notice something odd or interesting and to make light of it is and to do things aslant is a typical thing in pretty good poetry. At least that's Paterson's own style and ethic in his. But I think when the movie says, here's a twin, here's a twin, here's a twin, it gets to start to notice things, notice patterns and repetitions, interesting and important for poetic interpretation. And so to see all these twins, I feel like I start to look around the movie a lot more and notice other things and other repetitions as well as just the twins. So it sort of knocks me into the mode of noticing and being a close, careful observer. One thing that poetry does, or a lot of poetry, is it brings two unlike things together, things that no one thinks go together. So something like an analogy or a metaphor, those are fusing together two unlike things, or two things that don't seem to get along. That happens in this movie. I mean, all throughout the movie, the different conversations between different people. Paterson meets a little girl or a young girl. She does poetry. Late in the movie, not a spoiler, Paterson meets a Japanese man who's an actual Japanese poet. And, all of these encounters are fusions or fusings between two people who may be different, and yet they have a lot in common, a lot more than you would see on the surface. Another observation to make, I'm not sure to do with, there's a lot of circular imagery in this movie, certainly geometric shapes that Laura is interested in painting on the walls. She's an artistic person herself, but maybe her artistry isn't so great. Paterson doesn't seem to like her, Brussels sprout and cheddar cheese pie that she invented. I don't think he likes her cupcakes much either, but he actually is very, very kind about all that. She tries to create, she does actual stuff, but the circles are everywhere on the bed sheets and the Cheerios and the dryer that Paterson encounters a guy who's creating a rap song or some kind of rap music too. One thing I can think about that to try to make a connection is that there are letters everywhere. The letter O as a circle is everywhere. It's on the screen in Paterson's poetry while it's out in the world as a washer and dryer, or it's out in the world as Cheerios or something like that. All the scribbles, all the lines, all the shapes can form into letters which create meaning, and everyday life with its patterns, its repetitions, its lines, its shapes is meaningful just as alphabets are. You only have to be able to read it to appreciate it, love it, and soak it in, as Paterson and his wife do, and other people in this movie. Jarmusch is really strong here on the idea that art is labor. Art is a creative labor that anybody can do if they work at it and try, even with Paterson, who may not want his poetry out into the world, but he's making great stuff, and whether that's a secret only he knows about, or he and his wife, or the whole world, I don't think that matters as long as he's a creative type who's exercising that ability, enabled by one, the routine of his everyday life to give him some structure, and two, maybe not to have smartphones and screens in his life, although he and his wife do go watch a classic black and white movie at the near the end of the movie. What do you think about Paterson? Let us know in the comments, and please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you. Have a great day.